To the world, Johnny Carson was untouchable. The sharp wit, the charming host, the man who ruled late-night TV. But behind the applause was a lifelong struggle with one person he could never make laugh: his mother. Ruth Carson's coldness defined him in ways few understood, shaping not only his humor, but his pain. When she died, Johnny's response was as shocking as it was revealing. He refused to attend her funeral. Friends called it heartless, but the truth behind that decision paints a picture far more tragic than anyone ever imagined. A childhood curse turned into comic gold. Johnny Carson came into the world on October 23, 1925, in Corning, Iowa. His parents, Ruth Elizabeth Carson and Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, lived a simple life. His mother was a homemaker, and his father managed a local power company. Ruth had always hoped for more daughters, but ended up with just one girl, Catherine, alongside her two sons. According to biographer Lawrence Leamer, in The King of Late Night, The Life of Johnny Carson, Ruth ruled the home like the captain of a warship. Carson may have been a natural-born entertainer, but inside that household, he and his brother were constantly competing for their mother's attention and approval. Ruth was known to be strict, controlling, and often difficult. She could charm guests at family gatherings, but behind closed doors, she was demanding and cold, especially toward her sons. Johnny himself once described her as Lady Macbeth, the toughest of them all. Their relationship, to put it mildly, was toxic. Johnny's childhood unfolded across several small towns in southwest Iowa: Avoca, Red Oak, and Clarinda, before the family finally settled in Norfolk, Nebraska, when he was 8. That move would end up shaping his destiny. At 12, he stumbled across a book about magic and sleight of hand at a friend's house. It sparked something in him. Before long, he'd ordered a mail-in magician's kit and was practicing tricks non-stop, performing for anyone who'd watch. He spent his days pestering his family to pick a card, any card, while his mother, despite their rocky bond, showed a rare moment of support by sewing him a magician's cape. By 14, Johnny took his act public, performing his first show at the local Kiwanis Club under the name The Great Carsoni. From there, he started booking gigs at picnics and county fairs, slowly building the confidence that would one day make him America's favorite host. After finishing high school, Carson decided to chase his Hollywood dreams, literally hitchhiking his way there. Not long after arriving, he was reportedly arrested for impersonating a midshipman and fined, though that story remains debated. At 18, in 1943, Carson joined the Navy just 2 years after Pearl Harbor. He wasn't just serving, he was thriving. He boxed in amateur tournaments, going undefeated with a 10-0 record aboard the USS Pennsylvania. But no matter how much discipline the Navy taught him, his love for performing never faded. His big moment came when he performed a magic act for James Viv Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy. When Forrestal asked if he planned to stay in the service after the war, Johnny boldly told him no. His dream was to be a magician. That confidence stuck with him. If he could captivate a hard-nosed military official, he figured he could entertain anyone. After the war, Carson pursued a degree in journalism at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, initially aiming to become a comedy writer. Eventually, he switched to speech and drama, setting his sights on radio broadcasting. By 1949, he graduated with a degree in radio and speech and married Jody Wolcott that same year. Together, they had 3 sons: Christopher in 1950, Richard in 1952, and Corey in 1953. Carson wasted no time breaking into broadcasting. He started as a radio announcer, then moved into writing for Red Skelton in Los Angeles. He even landed his own radio program, The Johnny Carson Show, which aired every weekday. CBS eventually gave him his own TV show, but it was short-lived, canceled after just 8 months. When opportunity called again, it was in New York. Carson began filling in as a substitute host for quiz shows and soon became the host of Who Do You Trust? In 1957. His career was on fire, but his marriage wasn't. The long hours and constant work strained his family life. By 1959, Jody had enough. Their divorce was finalized in 1962. She later said he had become too busy for us, and by then, his fame had already started to eclipse everything else. That same year, Carson got the call that would change his life forever. After Jack Paar stepped down as host of The Tonight Show, NBC turned to him. There was a 6-month gap before his debut, but on October 1, 1962, Johnny Carson walked onto the stage for his first night as host. His guests that evening included Rudy Vallee, Mel Brooks, Tony Bennett, and Joan Crawford, a lineup that set the tone for what was to come. Carson didn't invent the late-night talk show format, but he perfected it. Each night began with a sharp, fast-paced monologue filled with one-liners, never dwelling on one topic for too long. The show rolled from comedy sketches to interviews with celebrities, politicians, and even scientists, wrapping up with a musical act or comedian. It became the blueprint that every late-night show still follows today. But even the king of late night wasn't immune to controversy. In 1969, Carson managed to cause quite a stir when he accidentally, or perhaps miraculously, spoiled the results of the 41st Academy Awards. During a sketch with comedian Buddy Hackett, taped hours before the Oscars aired, they joked that Oliver would win Best Picture and that Jack Albertson would take home Best Supporting Actor. And that's exactly what happened. When reporters pressed Hackett about how they knew, he smirked and said, "You have your sources, I have mine." Most people assumed it was just a wild coincidence, but it raised serious eyebrows at the Academy and at Price Waterhouse, the firm responsible for guarding the Oscar results. Fearing a breach, they launched an internal review, but eventually ruled that Carson and Hackett had simply made an extraordinarily lucky guess. A 1 in 25 chance, to be exact. The incident didn't hurt Carson's career one bit. In fact, the Academy eventually invited him to host the Oscars 5 times. It was just another reminder that Johnny Carson had a knack for being at the center of attention, even when he wasn't trying to be. Johnny Carson's unbelievable on-air moments. In the early days, Johnny Carson welcomed some of the biggest political names of the era onto The Tonight Show. People like Robert F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, and even Richard Nixon. But by the 1970s, Johnny made a conscious shift. He steered the show away from politics and toward the world of entertainment, a direction it would maintain for the rest of its historic run. Johnny was no fool. He understood the power of staying neutral, especially in an America that was often divided. During his monologues, interviews, and sketches, he made sure not to take sides. That balance, charming, funny, and nonpartisan, was part of what kept his massive audience coming back night after night. The show became a revolving door of soon-to-be legends. George Carlin, Robin Williams, Joan Rivers, Jerry Seinfeld, Drew Carey, and Gary Shandling were just a few of the many who saw their careers explode after sharing Carson's stage. Even a young Drew Barrymore made one of her early appearances there. Originally filmed live at 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York, The Tonight Show made the big move west in 1972, setting up shop in Burbank, California. Hollywood was where the stars were, and Carson wanted to be right in the middle of it. Despite how friendly and relaxed he seemed on screen, Johnny was surprisingly private off-camera. He rarely mingled with guests before or after the show. It was all business to him, even with people he'd known for years. Considering the amount of energy it took to entertain millions every night, it's not hard to see why. For someone constantly in the public eye, retreating behind the scenes was his way of recharging. But there was one rare exception. On September 23, 1976, when Hollywood icon Orson Welles was set to appear, Carson actually broke his usual rule. He was such a fan of Citizen Kane that he couldn't resist greeting Wells personally before the show, a moment that left his staff stunned. That was Johnny, disciplined and private, but every now and then full of genuine excitement. His signature Midwestern charm gave him the freedom to push boundaries on air, especially with his female guests. He could say things that would have gotten just about anyone else in trouble. And somehow, people laughed along. Ed McMahon, his longtime co-host and friend, once said Johnny had a knack for getting away with what others couldn't. And the ratings backed it up. Viewers loved him for that mix of wit, confidence, and charm. A perfect example came during his 1977 interview with Dolly Parton. At the time, Dolly was a rising country star, while Carson was already a late-night legend. The moment she stepped onto the stage, it was obvious he was captivated. Midway through their playful chat, Johnny looked her straight in the eye and said he'd pay a year's salary to see her unclothed. The audience roared, Dolly laughed it off, and the moment went down in TV history. Years later, Dolly joked right back that she'd pay to take a shower with him, proof that she could handle the teasing just fine. Carson had similar chemistry with his good friend Betty White. She was a regular on The Tonight Show and often joined him for sketches, like their playful Adam and Eve bit, which famously had them both pretending to be naked. Betty later joked that Johnny only called her when he wanted an excuse to take his clothes off. Then there was the night in 1979 when he hosted Italian film legend Sophia Loren. Johnny, ever the charmer, presented her with a gift box on live TV. Inside was a red garter. He explained that he'd heard she considered red her lucky color, so he wanted her to have something special for the show. Sophia didn't miss a beat. She smiled and handed him a small red bag of salt she carried for luck, saying she wouldn't be needing it anymore now that she had the garter. It was classic Carson, bold, flirty, and somehow still smooth enough to make it work. Of course, not every story tied to Johnny's reputation came with proof. One of the most famous involves actress Zsa Zsa Gabor, who supposedly brought her cat to the show. The tale goes that she asked Johnny if he wanted to pet her, and he allegedly replied that he would, but there was a cat in the way. Whether that exchange ever really happened remains a mystery. Many say it's an urban legend, but the story refuses to die. Even Jane Fonda once brought up the rumor during her appearance on the show. Johnny just smiled and claimed he had no memory of it, which, honestly, sounds exactly like something he'd say. True or not, stories like that stuck because they fit the image Johnny had built. The charming, quick-witted host who could walk the fine line between playful and provocative. Over 30 years, he gave audiences laughter, surprise, and the kind of late-night moments that people still talk about decades later. A secret Carson couldn't joke about. Johnny Carson struggled with alcoholism for much of his life, and when he drank, which was often, his personality could take a sharp turn. Those closest to him described him as a cruel drunk, someone who lost his warmth and patience after a few too many drinks. In 1982, Carson's drinking landed him in serious trouble. One night, he was caught driving his DeLorean while under the influence. He ended up pleading no contest to a misdemeanor charge and received 3 years of probation. As part of his sentence, he was required to attend an alcohol education program and had strict limits placed on his driving. For a while, he could only drive to and from work, and never with passengers or even pets in the car. Still, Carson never tried to hide the fact that he had a drinking problem. He wasn't the type to put his struggles on display, but he also didn't pretend they didn't exist. He avoided the press to dodge uncomfortable questions, yet he openly acknowledged his addiction when he felt it mattered. In fact, his personal battles with alcohol shaped the way he handled jokes about drinking on his show. His humor often carried a touch of self-awareness. During a candid interview with 60 Minutes, Carson reflected on his relationship with alcohol. He admitted that while there were fun moments in his drinking days, he didn't handle it well overall. It was one of the few times the public saw him drop his usual cool, polished demeanor and speak honestly about his flaws. One of Carson's most memorable professional relationships was with Joan Rivers. Long before she became known for her sharp tongue and bold red carpet commentary, Rivers was a young comic trying to make it in New York City during the 1950s. Her big break came in 1965 when she appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. After her debut, Carson famously predicted she would become a star, and he was right. Rivers' appearance led to a writing job on The Tonight Show, and over time, she became one of Carson's most trusted guest hosts. Whenever he was on vacation or under the weather, she was often the one who stepped in. Their chemistry on screen was natural, and for years, they seemed to share both mutual respect and friendship. But that bond shattered in 1986. That year, Rivers accepted an offer from Fox to host her own late-night program, The Late Show, with Joan Rivers. The show's time slot? The exact same as The Tonight Show. In doing so, she became the first woman to host a late-night talk show. But she also found herself in direct competition with her mentor. When Carson found out, he was furious. Rivers said she tried to call him to explain, but he hung up and never spoke to her again. Not only did he ban her from The Tonight Show, but he also blacklisted any guest who appeared on her competing program. Rivers' new show struggled under the pressure and eventually failed, but the damage to her relationship with Carson was permanent. Years later, Rivers opened up about the painful rift. She said she never fully understood why he reacted so harshly, believing perhaps he saw her as someone who belonged to him professionally, someone who shouldn't challenge him. She suspected that gender played a role in his anger, that he couldn't accept being rivaled by a woman he'd once mentored. The two never reconciled before Carson's death. Despite his personal flaws, Carson continued to have some of the most iconic moments in late-night television. In 1987, he welcomed Madonna for her first talk show appearance. True to her bold persona, she arrived wearing nothing but lingerie as outerwear, leaving Carson both surprised and amused. He tried to play it cool, but it was clear even the king of late night didn't quite know how to handle her unapologetic confidence. That same year, another moment revealed a different side of Carson, the side that could still get nervous despite decades in front of an audience. When Betty White asked him during an interview if any guest had ever made him uneasy, Carson admitted that Audrey Hepburn had left him completely unnerved. He described her as proper and graceful, someone whose quiet elegance threw him off balance. Hepburn, at that point, was more than a Hollywood icon. She was a global humanitarian and UNICEF ambassador. Even Carson, known for his composure, couldn't help but feel intimidated by her poise. Through moments like these, his public triumphs, private battles, and complicated relationships, Johnny Carson remained one of the most fascinating figures in television history. A man who could make the world laugh every night, even while wrestling with demons of his own. The final days of a legend. On March 19, 1999, Johnny Carson suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Malibu, California. He was rushed to a nearby hospital in Santa Monica, where doctors performed quadruple bypass surgery. The cause wasn't much of a mystery. For decades, Carson had been a heavy smoker, so much so that he often lit cigarettes right on camera during the early years of The Tonight Show. At one point, he was going through 4 packs of Pall Malls a day. By the mid-1970s, he already knew what the habit was doing to him. He'd often joke, saying things like, "These things are killing me." His brother later recalled that during their final conversation, Johnny just kept repeating, "Those damn cigarettes." In 2002, Carson skipped NBC's 75th anniversary celebration and later revealed that he was battling emphysema. Still, He insisted he wasn't terminally ill. But 3 years later, on January 23, 2005, Carson passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. The official cause was respiratory failure due to emphysema. His body was cremated, and his ashes were given to his wife, Alexis Moss. As his family wished, there was no public memorial service. After his passing, David Letterman paid tribute to his mentor in the most fitting way possible. During his first monologue following Carson's death, every joke he told had been written by Johnny himself. Letterman described Carson as a public utility, someone the world simply expected to be there at the end of the day. During his long run on The Tonight Show, Carson's numbers were off the charts. His version of the show nearly doubled the ratings of his predecessors, Steve Allen and Jack Paar. By the 1970s, he was television's highest-paid star, and by the early 1990s, his annual salary had reached an astonishing $25 million. Even after retiring in 1992, his net worth remained impressive, around $300 million by the time of his death. But Carson wasn't just about fame and money. He quietly gave back, creating the John W. Carson Foundation to support children, education, and health services, especially in Los Angeles and his home state of Nebraska. His foundation received most of his $156 million trust, which later grew to $200 million. He also left $4 million to the Los Angeles Children's Hospital. His wife, Alexis Moss, inherited the rest of his estate, which she shared with Carson's surviving sons, Chris and Corey. His other son, Richard, had tragically died in a car accident in 1991. All three sons were from his first marriage to Jody Merrill Wolcott. Carson's children largely stayed out of the spotlight, and none followed their father into show business. According to his former attorney and biographer Henry Bushkin, Carson's kids never gave him anything to be particularly proud of. Still, the loss of Richard deeply affected him and made him more reflective about life and family. Just a year after the accident, he decided to step away from television for good. During his final Tonight Show sign-off, Carson turned to the camera and addressed his sons directly, acknowledging how hard it must have been growing up in his shadow and ending with a simple, heartfelt message. He loved them. In retirement, Carson lived quietly in Malibu with Moss until his death. She later sold their 4-acre estate in 2007 for $36.5 million. Even now, Johnny Carson's legacy looms large. His influence still echoes through every late-night monologue delivered today. When Jimmy Fallon took over The Tonight Show in 2014, it became clear that the seat Johnny once filled wasn't just a hosting gig, it was a piece of television history. Carson remains the gold standard, remembered not only for his sharp wit, but for the humanity and humility that defined his remarkable life. The dark side of Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson was known for his sharp wit and charm on screen, but off-camera, his reputation for being difficult and temperamental was well known. He didn't take kindly to anyone who got on his nerves, and, unfortunately, that list often included the people closest to him. One of them was his fourth wife, Alexis Moss. Their marriage began with turmoil almost right out of the gate. During their honeymoon in Italy, aboard Johnny's luxury yacht no less, the mood soured quickly. At one point, Alexis made what seemed to be an innocent comment that rubbed Johnny the wrong way. His response was shockingly harsh. He warned her that even though they'd only been married for 3 weeks, if she ever said something like that again, their union wouldn't last another 3. Despite that rocky start, their marriage actually stood the test of time. They remained together until Johnny's death in 2005. Since then, Alexis has kept a low profile, steering clear of the spotlight and public attention. No one really knows much about her life after Johnny's passing, or if she ever found love again. While this final marriage endured, it was his earlier relationships that really revealed the cracks in Carson's personal life. His first marriage brought him 3 sons, But none of his later marriages produced any more children. One of those sons, Ruth Carson, tried to find his own path, both in and out of show business. Rick served in the U.S. Navy, but his time there was troubled. Reports suggested that he battled alcoholism and mental health issues while stationed in Alaska. He eventually ended up at Bellevue Hospital in New York for treatment, but Johnny reportedly never went to see him. Rick also worked in television, taking jobs behind the scenes. He served as a production assistant and later an associate director on Tomorrow, the late-night show hosted by Tom Snyder. After that show ended, Rick struggled to regain his footing professionally, eventually turning to photography. He found peace behind the camera, capturing landscapes and nature scenes that reflected a quieter side of him. But tragedy struck in June 1991. While driving along Cayucos Drive, a narrow road near California's Highway 1, Rick's car veered off the road and rolled down an embankment. He was thrown from the vehicle and died from his injuries at just 39 years old. Investigators believed he may have been distracted, possibly taking photos, when the crash happened. Johnny was devastated. He took a month off from The Tonight Show to grieve. When he finally returned, he shared photos of Rick and some of his work, speaking tenderly about his son's spirit and warmth. He told viewers that Rick's laughter was contagious and that losing him reminded him of what truly mattered in life. Yet, behind that heartfelt tribute was a painful truth. Johnny admitted that his relationship with Rick had always been difficult, and now it was too late to make amends. Johnny's personal struggles weren't limited to fatherhood. His second marriage to Pan Am stewardess Joanne Copeland was a storm of jealousy, betrayal, and insecurity. They met in 1960 while Johnny was hosting Who Do You Trust? And tied the knot not long after. But their marriage was plagued by infidelity on both sides. Joanne had an affair with sports legend Frank Gifford, and Johnny had his own string of affairs. By the time they divorced in 1972, their breakup had turned into a public spectacle. Court proceedings revealed Johnny's alcoholism and his deep-seated insecurities. He constantly suspected Joanne of cheating, and when he found out she had a secret apartment for meeting another man, his darker instincts took over. Johnny reportedly showed up unannounced at that apartment, trying to catch her in the act. The discovery shattered him. One friend claimed Johnny broke down in tears at the thought of his wife's betrayal. Around that time, he was said to have begun carrying a revolver. No one knew exactly why, but it painted a picture of a man unraveling. Like many powerful men in Hollywood, Carson had a reputation for being both a womanizer and, at times, abusive. One story even suggested that his involvement with the girlfriend of a man tied to organized crime nearly got him killed. And during the collapse of his second marriage, his affair with Playboy model Angel Tompkins caused even more chaos. His lawyer warned that the relationship could hurt his divorce settlement. But Johnny didn't care. He made it clear that he wasn't worried about consequences. As the divorce played out, Johnny's drinking and depression deepened. He isolated himself and became increasingly distrustful, particularly of women. It was a dark period that shaped much of his later life. The real reason why Johnny Carson refused to go to her funeral. Johnny Carson was a man of many talents, and even today, people remember him more for his incredible success in entertainment than for any of his personal struggles. But when it came to figuring out who shaped some of his flaws, or maybe even caused them, Carson himself didn't hesitate to name one person: his mother, Ruth. It all started in small-town Iowa. Born in 1925 to Homer and Ruth Carson in Corning, Johnny grew up in a home ruled by a woman who ran things with military precision. Biographer Lawrence Leamer described Ruth as the captain of a warship, a woman who kept her household in strict order and rarely showed much warmth. Johnny and his brother were constantly competing for her attention and, more importantly, her approval. By most accounts, Ruth was difficult. According to History 101, she was a good hostess when guests were around, but behind closed doors, She was controlling and quick-tempered. Johnny's first wife, Jody Wolcott, once recalled hearing stories of Ruth's explosive temper. How she once smashed an entire set of dishes against the kitchen wall. Ruth was, without a doubt, the dominant figure in that house, and her word was law. Lemur suggested that Carson's relentless drive to succeed in show business came from a deep desire to finally earn his mother's praise. He worked tirelessly to impress her, but no matter how big his accomplishments got, Ruth never seemed to give him the recognition he craved. There's a telling story from when Carson received the prestigious Governor's Award from the Television Academy. Excited, he called his mother to share the news, saying, "Mom, they're giving me the Governor's Award. It's for lifetime achievement in the television industry." Her reply, "Well, I suppose they know what they're doing." That was Ruth, cold, detached, and unimpressed. Carson would later joke that his mother was Lady Macbeth and the toughest of them all. But behind the humor was real pain. He blamed her, in part, for many of his failed marriages and emotional distance in relationships. Their bond was so fractured that when Ruth passed away, Carson didn't even attend her funeral. Actor Burt Reynolds, one of Carson's longtime friends, wrote about their complicated relationship in his memoir, But Enough About Me. He recalled that Carson often complained about his mother and how little affection she ever showed him. Ruth, a homemaker who once admitted she didn't like boys because they were dirty, never seemed proud of her famous son. Reynolds even recounted a story where a reporter tried to watch The Tonight Show with Ruth to see her reaction. She frowned through the monologue, then simply said, "That wasn't funny," before walking out of the room. Reynolds shared another moment that revealed just how deep the rift went. When Carson learned of his mother's death, he reportedly said, "The wicked witch is dead." It was a harsh reaction, but perhaps it said everything about the emotional toll that relationship had taken on him. Still, there was one final twist to their story. After Ruth's death, Carson discovered a box she had kept hidden away. Inside were countless newspaper clippings all about him, his shows, his awards, his achievements. She had saved them all. Despite her coldness, it turned out that she had quietly followed his career with pride. Carson kept that box in his bedroom closet until the day he died in 2005, a silent reminder of the complicated love that defined his life.